In 2011, I was a sophomore in high school and was hanging out with my friend Hadley. We live in the Rust Belt, and the population of our area has declined a lot in the last 40 to 50 years. As a result of this, schools were merged due to declining enrollment, which meant there were a lot of abandoned schools around. I lived in a small town on the Pennsylvania-Ohio border, and the abandoned school was a hot spot for teenagers. They either wanted to smoke weed and break windows, or just overall cause some havoc. My friend and I were in a breezeway type area. You could just step right in over a 1.5-foot wall because all the glass had been long since smashed out. All of a sudden though, a guy comes around the corner and grabs my friend, telling her to come with him right now. At the time, we thought it was a guy who intended to call the cops on us, so we booked it the fuck out of there. We walked over to my cousin's house down the street. It was the day before my aunt's birthday. It was also a supermoon that day as well. This meant that all my family was at my cousin's house. We hung out with them for a bit. They all ended up going out to eat, but my cousin, Hadley, and I stayed back at the house. It was now really dark outside. We were just sitting there on my cousin's stoop, smoking cigarettes and minding our own business, when all of a sudden we see a man walking down my cousin's driveway from the direction of her garage, not the direction of the street. The man immediately pulled his coat over his mouth once he saw us, and pulled his hat down to his eyes as well. Only his eyes and nose were now visible, and he was making a strange gesture at us. At first glance, I thought he was jangling keys or something. My dumbass thought our uncle was trying to give us the house keys. I walked right up to the man. All of a sudden, my cousin shouted, "Jake, get the fuck away from him!" Now that I was a little bit closer, I could see what he was really doing, masturbating. We turned around and ran around the house to the front door. The door to the stoop was literally never ever used and was blocked by a bunch of shit because it opened to a storage room. Thankfully, we managed to get inside without problem. The man arrived at the front door shortly after us and finished all over the sliding glass door. He then ran back towards our garage into the woods. Now we were freaking the fuck out. We called the cops, they asked us some questions, and then they left. About a week later, a girl who had graduated from our high school heard about what happened and remembered seeing a car parked on the street behind my cousin's garage at one point in time. She found it suspicious, so she had taken down the license plate number. She reported that number to the police. It was registered to an Ohio man, so not much could be done on our side. A few weeks later, though, this same car chased a woman home from Walmart in Youngstown, Ohio, and attempted to break inside and mirror her. Needless to say, he was arrested. Turns out he had a habit of trying to sexually assault people in Walmart parking lots in both Newcastle, Pennsylvania and Youngstown, Ohio. He faced charges now in both states, and my cousin, friend, and I were all subpoenaed to testify against him. When we got to court, we saw his mugshot. The guy who had masturbated and chased us was the same guy who had grabbed my friend at the abandoned school. He wasn't gonna call the cops that time. He was gonna try to grab her and do God knows what. In the end, he got a few years in prison, but I believe he got out in 2015 or 2016. "4 years ago, when I was 17 years old, my best friend Hannah, also 17, came over to my house for the weekend. I believe it was a Saturday night when this happened. We had stayed up very late as teenagers at a sleepover want to do. Ate some junk food, watched some movies together. It was around 1 a.m. when I decided to take a shower and then head to bed. After our horror movie marathon, I was pretty paranoid, so I asked Hannah to sit in the bathroom with me while I showered. She accepted and did just that. She sat down on the toilet and started playing some music on her cell phone. We talked about whatever we had going on in our lives while I showered. Finally, after probably 20 minutes or so in the shower, I got out and grabbed a towel. Hannah was still sitting on the toilet, and she said my name. I turned to face her. That's when I noticed some movement in the bathroom window just above her head. The window cling distorted it slightly, but I knew immediately what I was looking at. A face, a man's face, smirking at me from the other side of the glass. The man ducked out of view instantly once he saw I'd noticed him. I quickly faced away, wrapping the towel around me tight. I whispered to Hannah that there was a man looking into the window. She laughed, thinking I was messing with her, so she bravely stood up, and to her horror, came face to face with this creep, now staring at her and smirking as well. We ran out of the bathroom and woke my parents, but of course the creepy dude was already gone by the time my dad got outside. That man better be glad for that. The next day, my parents investigated outside the window. There was a cinder block propped underneath it that the man had apparently been standing on, indicating this probably wasn't the first time he'd peeped on me. Stuffed in between that block and the wall, a big bag of lotion. The window cling was useless, as you could see everything inside the bathroom clearly from the outside. We didn't know that at the time though. Now I still can't shower without having the bathroom windows covered. So, 23-year-old guy here. I live in a pretty safe neighborhood and usually always lock my doors. Last night though, I apparently forgot to. It was not too long after I had just taken my dogs out for the last time. I was turning off the TV and lights when one of my dogs suddenly started growling. That wasn't too weird, I guess. He sometimes did that whenever people would walk by the house. He would also only do it to certain people as well and not everyone. Then though, I heard the distinct sound of the front door opening and someone walking inside. My dog then started barking like crazy. My other dog, who loves all people, came running from the other room to greet our mysterious guest. At the very same time as all this was happening, I was reacting as well. What the fuck? Who are you? Standing in the hall was a man in his mid to late 20s. He was skinny and extremely tall. Oh, I don't think I'm in the right place. He seemed genuinely confused. Hell no you aren't, get the fuck out! The man apologized profusely and said he had only been coming to hang out with a friend and just sort of accidentally wandered into the wrong place. I asked the man what house he had originally been looking for. He said a number that was just a couple of numbers off from mine. He apologized again and left immediately. The man seemed pretty nice and non-threatening, but of course I was still spooked no matter what. In the morning, I was ready to just laugh the entire thing off as a drunken mistake or something. I was planning on telling my neighbor, a couple in their 30s, what had happened. I didn't know them all too well, but we had talked here and there occasionally. Luckily, I managed to just catch one of them when I was taking my dogs out. I didn't really want to come off like I was mad or scared over what happened, so I casually brought it up to them. You know, I'm sure he told you about it, but your friend gave me quite a surprise visit last night. My neighbor gave me this extremely confused look. What are you talking about? Your friend, he walked into my house last night thinking it was your place. My neighbor was very quiet for a second. I don't want to alarm you, but I have no idea what you're talking about. We didn't have any friends over last night. We didn't invite anybody either. To start off with, I'm a hunter, and I like to hunt wild boar specifically. Though I have been deer hunting and have been known to bag a turkey or two for Thanksgiving, I mostly tend to hunt boars. For those of you who might not know, boar are a huge problem in the United States. A sow can have 2 litters a year, and it's not uncommon for a litter to consist of 10 or more pigs. Well, given that pigs eat and kill anything and everything, it's not hard to see why the Department of Fish and Wildlife makes it legal to hunt them with almost no restrictions. In fact, in my state, it's illegal to hunt most large mammals with night vision or thermal scopes, with the exception of boar and coyotes. I've been saving for a year, mostly fun money. It's hard to explain to your wife that a scope that cost literally twice as much as the rifle I was mounting it to was worth it. Still though, I did it, and I took it to a range and sighted it in. There was an area that was peppered with boar activity, and I knew it would be the perfect place for a night hunt. It was easily accessible with my truck, with easy-to-find spots that I could set up in, which overlooked an easy-to-navigate clearing. The night started out pretty uneventfully, mostly me just tinkering with my new toy, cycling through all the fancy settings. I was getting a little bit impatient. I'd spotted multiple deer, but they were out of season, and like I mentioned earlier, my current setup was not legal for hunting deer. I moved over to another spot I'd seen days earlier that probably would not be much better than my first. Still though, at the very least, it gave me something to do and a new angle to look around with my new scope. After an hour or so of glassing the area, it dawned on me. This spot didn't seem to have much animal activity at all. No rabbits or owls. That deer I'd seen was hundreds of yards away from where I was. Why exactly was this particular pocket of land so dead at night, but lively in the daytime? I'd set up at around 10 p.m. It was around 2 a.m. when I was finally thinking about packing up. Maybe I'd set up a target before I left and take some practice shots or something so it wasn't a waste. I heard a crunch come from the direction I'd come from before in that moment. Instantly, I panned my scope over, only to see a silhouette of a small bear pushing through the bushes. It's important to note that my scope isn't exactly night vision. It's a thermal scope, kinda like a black and white version of what you might see in the Predator movies. I adjusted my range and zoomed in a little bit. I remember jolting a bit when I saw that it wasn't actually a bear. I was looking at a man. Because he was so low and hunched over, I had thought I was looking at a young bear at first. Was that a game warden, perhaps? It couldn't be. I would have seen the headlights coming up the road from where I was perched at. And where could he have walked in from? It was 30 miles away from anything and on public lands. I was about to call out when I adjusted my sights and noticed that this man was naked. No shoes, pants, socks, not a single thing covering him. I remember being very disturbed by his movements as well, like a strange squirrel or something, very twitchy and grabbing at the foliage, sniffing around and palming the trees. Was that my tree? The one I'd been leaning against earlier? For a moment, a terrified thought occurred to me. Could this man smell me somehow? Then he did something I still have nightmares about today. The man suddenly squatted, placed both his hands in the dirt between his feet, and stared straight up like a dog mid-howl. I heard something, a voice coming from that direction as well, a very compelling female voice. "Help! I'm lost!" It was a long pause, but neither of us moved a single muscle. The center of my sights was trained at the dirt in front of his feet. I couldn't bring myself to aim directly at another person. That went against everything I'd ever been taught about firearm safety. Were they lost? Was this some guy who had gone crazy out there? Why was his voice so feminine now? "Help, please, I can't walk!" The voice called out. That's when I called bullshit. Not only could he walk just fine, when I first saw him, he was traversing the land with ease for a naked person. Obviously, this was a trap. This guy was trying to lure me to him with this damsel in distress routine. Luckily, the lack of activity before had caused me to pack up most of my gear. I may have left a hat and a sitting pad behind or something, but who gives a shit about that in this kind of moment? I took my eyes off him for a moment to get my pack on. I buckled my chest strap and scrambled for my rifle. To my horror, he was in the same position, but now he turned directly to face my direction. I swear I saw him smile. The thermal scope having an effect that made his eyes appear pure white. How the hell had he heard me get up and put my gear on? He must have been 150 yards away. "Hey, fuck off!" I screamed in that direction. The man stood upright immediately, and it hit me just how tall and skinny he was. He was 6 feet tall and extremely lean. The man took a couple of long strides in my direction. Instinctively, I fired a warning shot above his head into the tree line. The man was freaky as hell, but he hadn't really threatened me or done anything really. What would I tell the cops if I was to call them? And it's not like I was standing here willing and ready to shoot someone in the forest. The man stopped dead in his tracks and hunched down on all fours. "I promise you, the next one will fuck you up. Go away!" He stayed on all fours. This time, I had my sights trained on the center of him. His eyes were just above the grass like a large cat or something. I was trying to stop my trembling. I knew my voice had cracked a bit on that last warning. I was completely terrified. That standoff only lasted a minute or two, maybe less, but it felt like an eternity. In an instant, he bolted left toward the tree line opposite the road. Well, so much for not being able to walk, I guess. I could barely keep him within my scope's sights as he was moving too fast. He disappeared into the brush. I sent another bullet sailing high in his direction. I racked another round and tried to pocket that mag and swap for a fresh one. I dropped it and didn't even bother looking though. At this point, I wasn't far away from my truck, and I just wanted to leave this place. I could now hear the man off in the distance, yelling this weird sound that could have been something between a laugh and a cry. I scrambled up the trail and arrived at my truck completely breathless. I tossed my gear into the cab and kept my rifle in the passenger seat. I sped off. For the longest time, I told that story from the perspective of having spotted some deranged crackhead living off the land like some kind of caveman hermit. I reported it to Fish and Game, but all they did was scold me for hunting alone at night. I never really received an update. I told my nephew as well at a camping trip. My story scared the piss out of him, because the spot we were camping was technically the very same forest I'd seen that bastard before, just 50 miles east of it. He got so spooked his mom had to take him home. She was actually really pissed at me. I've gone down the rabbit hole on these scary stories, and I am generally a skeptic. I'm not saying what I saw was definitely like a Wendigo or a skinwalker or something like that. I'm saying that if such a thing does exist, it would be exactly like that guy was that night. All I know is that I dodged a hell of a bullet. Maybe it was just a tweaker being Donnie Thornberry in the middle of the night. Either way, I thought you guys might like this one. So today has been a particularly slow day at work, and I've been killing time listening to stories. Maybe enough time has passed that I can finally share my own. Back in the day, I used to have this friend who was really into the occult. Unfortunately, I was the one who got him turned onto it. We had a mutual appreciation of the paranormal and all things weird, so I thought the subject would really interest him. He started going real deep into the subject though, to the point where he refused to talk about anything else. He would actually interrupt conversations and always force the subject back to occult matters. It was rude, but I thought at the time sometimes people can go through phases where their interest is all they really want to talk about, you know? It's a mostly forgivable offense. I think I should mention also that this particular friend did not have a very large friend circle. His depression and introverted nature kept him inside quite a lot. He also didn't have the best of luck in relationships with women. His whole world was just kind of small. I did enjoy hanging out with him, so I did my best to be a good friend. I didn't want to just brush him off because he was acting a little bit weirder than usual. Honestly, for the longest time, he was a totally normal guy. We'd chat and play games together on PlayStation. We'd go to movies together with my boyfriend accompanying us, and we all hung out at the park together. We even went swimming, and overall just had a good time spending time together. Things really started to go downhill when he started to smoke DMT. Personally, I think psychedelics are amazing tools that can offer insight into your life, but they are still a drug, and they should be treated with respect. My friend eventually got to the point where he was making the stuff himself and smoking it almost daily, sometimes multiple times a day. For those of you who aren't familiar with this particular substance, when you smoke it, you get transported to an entirely different world, a new plane of existence. Your body and self don't exist anymore. You're just kind of exploring this alternate reality dreamscape. My personal experience with it led me to seeing a dragon once in this kaleidoscope of a cornucopia. People see all kinds of things when they're there. Now imagine what that does to a person when they're doing it 30 plus times in a day sometimes. He started to get real bad delusions, started telling me things like he was the reincarnated Osiris. He was seeing Egyptian hieroglyphs all over the place in waking life. He would have hour-long conversations with entities in his bedroom, even when he was no longer smoking DMT. Of course, I was very alarmed to hear all of this. I told him he really needed to take a serious break. No drugs at all for a few months, until he could find his solid footing in reality once again. At this point, I was still hanging out with him, because very obviously he needed some help. Like I said before, he didn't have a lot of support that could give him that. Because of everything that had gone down, he was the black sheep of the family as well, so I knew he wouldn't get any support from them either. He was at least really close to his sister. I did reach out to her on Facebook to express my concerns. I pushed her to talk him into getting some psychiatric help because he was very quickly slipping past the point of no return. Unfortunately, I'm not really sure if she took my messages very seriously. We didn't really know each other at all. Plus, she was at least 6 years younger than us and possibly didn't grasp how serious the situation was. In any case, I'll jump forward now to the part where things started to get real creepy. My boyfriend had made some arrangements to hang out with our friend at the park. I didn't really want to go because I felt like I needed a break from him and his nonsensical ranting. I just couldn't deal with it on that particular day. My boyfriend, though, said he wasn't all that bad this day, so we went anyway. We got to the park and he was his usual self, ranting about Egypt and made-up gods that only he knew the truth about. He had this large hunting knife that he kept fiddling with the whole time we were on a walk. He then told us he had been practicing ceremonial magic with it, and it helped him to banish negative thoughts. This made me extremely uneasy. He would keep doing this thing where he would take the knife and make stabbing motions near his heart and head, like he was mock stabbing himself, way too close for comfort. All while holding a conversation with me and my boyfriend. We were both starting to get real on edge, but we didn't know how to say something or do anything about it. I tried to distract him by bringing up other subjects I thought might interest him, but he kept on going right back to this ritual. Keep in mind, we were walking on a trail, so it wasn't like we could just say goodbye then and there. We had to walk back to our car and drop him off at his. Well, my boyfriend had the bright idea to get some lunch together after our walk, even though I was doing my very best to give him a look that said, "No, you crazy fuck, why do you think I want to spend any more time with this damn nut?" I guess it must not have been very effective. Either that or my boyfriend was ignoring it. Not really sure. Either way, we ended up piling into the car together. I was driving, my boyfriend was in the passenger seat, and our weirdo friend was in the back. As we're heading through a busy part of town, where all the shopping and restaurants are, I hear the distinctive sound of a belt buckle coming undone. Then I heard the worst sound imaginable. I peeked back out of the corner of my eye, and my suspicions were confirmed. This crazy fucker was full-on jacking off in our back seat. I mean pants all the way down, bare ass on the seat, beating it so hard it looked like he was about to rip it off entirely. Instantly, I felt sick to my stomach. All the nervous energy I had throughout the day popped into my head. I tried to ignore this as I drove through the heavy traffic. I kinda had a freeze response, I guess. The whole time I kept thinking about that huge-ass knife he had on him, and how obviously he was completely off the rocker now. I was afraid to say anything or confront him. I didn't know how he was going to react. As impossibly crazy as this sounds, my boyfriend didn't seem to notice at all. The entire time he was rambling on about God knows what. I couldn't listen though because my thoughts were now 100% focused on driving and not getting stabbed from the back seat. When we got to the restaurant, my boyfriend ran inside to grab some food. I was left all alone in the car with our friend. I tried to act like I was browsing on my phone, when in reality I was watching and listening him as hard as I could. Neither of us said a word. My boyfriend arrived back and I complained that I was tired. Let's just drop our friend off at home. I drive us back to our friend's car. He doesn't get out of our vehicle. He just kinda sits there, like he's been turned off or something. At this point, I had to get a little bit rude. I asked him to please get out and go home. He got out and walked over to his passenger side. He pulled a gun out of some kind of bag he had on the seat and walked over to our car with it. I don't know why the fuck I did this, but I was so pissed I got out of my car and walked right up to him. I could see he was now holding a loaded 9mm. I kept on asking him over and over what he was going to do with that, because apparently that's all my brain could think to do. I told him to hop in his car and go home. He'd not said a single thing during this entire time. He just kinda cried and had this really wild look in his eye. For whatever reason, he got back into his car and drove off. I told my boyfriend obviously we were never hanging out with him again. I didn't even want to talk to him anymore. No contact, nothing. A few months passed by and he would occasionally message me through PlayStation or texts on my phone. It was a lot of random stuff getting even crazier and crazier. I just tried to ignore it. Turned out he had moved down to Tennessee near Nashville. I don't really know why. He had a roommate and I think their girlfriend lived there as well. I'm not really sure about the situation. At this point, I thought perhaps he was turning his life around finally, getting a fresh start down there. I thought it was best to cut all contact and just let him regroup. I was not really interested in any kind of friendship, and I know he needed help far beyond what I could ever offer. Again, I reached out to his sister and let her know he had a gun now as well. She managed to get him to hand it over somehow. Not that it did very much good in the end. I got a call around 11 p.m. one night that woke me up. It was a man claiming he was a detective down in Gallatin, Tennessee. My heart skipped a beat. I started sweating and immediately asked what had happened. Apparently, my former friend had stabbed someone to death on Halloween Day. I don't know all the details. The whole thing was very surreal. I was just left feeling I was very lucky I didn't get shot that day last summer. This all turned out way longer than I meant it to be, but that's the entire story. I'm still feeling creeped out by the whole ordeal and kind of feeling sick after writing all of this. In February of 2012, I went to visit my grandfather's grave for his birthday. His death had been a really hard thing for me to deal with, as he had died in March of 2011, and it was still very fresh in my mind. I was kneeling in front of his grave with my head down, mourning and crying, when my body suddenly went into full danger is close mode. I looked up, only to see a man running in full sprint out of the woods surrounding the cemetery. I forced myself up and ran to my truck as quickly as possible without the man getting close to me. By the time I had made it, he had already gotten about 50 feet away from me. I jumped in and locked the door immediately, much to his very visible displeasure. He threw his hands up in a huff, like his favorite sports team had just lost a football game or something. I started up my truck and started to drive out as fast as I could, but not before driving right past that man. I didn't break eye contact for a second, and neither did he. I got a really good look at his face. Cut now to a few years later. I'm at work bored when I decided to download an app that had a ton of paranormal, cryptid, serial killer, and UFO articles. As I was browsing through the serial killer section, I came across one that made my heart drop into my ass. Israel Keyes, most known for murdering an underage girl in Alaska, dismembering her body, and dropping the pieces into a frozen lake. He would bury kill kits in places long before he ever committed crimes there. Apparently, after the incident in Alaska, he had traveled into Texas for a wedding in a city not too far from where I live, and had disappeared for a bit. No one in his family knew where he was. He was arrested in that very same city and brought to the prison one city over from me. Then he was extradited back to Alaska to stand trial. About a year ago, I found a book about him that provided a lot of the details I've given here. He had been killing for years, and no one knows what his actual death toll is. He eventually killed himself in prison. At the end of the book about him, he describes some of his favorite places to abduct people, public parks and cemeteries. I often wonder if there's a kit buried out in those woods somewhere. He was fast, but luckily I was faster that day, and I'm glad we didn't have the chance to officially meet.